Welcome to the Take Action podcast, where we empower communication partners to feel confident with AAC. I am Lauren Greenleaf, a certified speech-language pathologist with nearly a decade of experience in AAC. Join us weekly as we dive into all of the aspects of AAC and hear from communication partners just like you who are successfully integrating AAC into their daily lives. Whether you are an SLP, a parent, an educator, or any other communication partner, you are absolutely in the right place if you are ready to take actionable steps towards AAC success today.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Take Action podcast. I am here this week with Abbye, who is the mom of an AAC user. So, Abbye, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's dive right in to kind of your journey. How did you guys get started with AAC? Tell us a little bit about your family so everybody knows where we're starting.
Okay, yeah. So at age 3, my son Bowen was taken, I took him to the school to have his evaluation done because he really was not talking. And that was he just turned 3, and that was back in August of 2 years ago. And so I took him in and he was evaluated, and they said that he had apraxia, which I'd never heard of before. And they did some more testing, and the school SLP had different AAC devices there for him to try out and use. I wasn't able to be in on those evaluations. I had to wait in the waiting room for those things. But eventually she was like, I found an AAC that I think that he's going to work really well with. And that was in January. It took a long time for us to get to that part of it. So that was then in January. Well, we ended up moving in April. And so we were in a new school district. And so he'd only used that AAC at the school and in those sessions that he'd had. So we didn't have one at home. We had talked about the school, kind of checking one out. Would we be able to take it home? But because of just the quick move and things changing in life, that never happened. So I had never really seen the AAC. She brought it in once and I got to see it, but I really didn't know what it was, how it worked, anything like that. So we ended up moving, and I was like, well, I guess we should get an AAC. We probably need one. He had severe apraxia. He only had roughly 13 words that he could say verbally. And we did sign language, and that was a big sign language. We do lots of sign language. However, it gets hard when grandma comes over, or when other places where people don't know that sign language like we do. So I go onto Facebook to my friends, trying not to buy an iPad just outright. And so I said, does anybody have an old one that I could maybe buy from you? I didn't want to do marketplace because it's just sketchy sometimes. Yeah. And so I had a friend reach out, and she's like, hey, I have an iPad that you can have. And it had to be so new where the software wasn't going to work. So I checked it out, made sure that it was new enough that the software would work. And it did. So she mailed it to me. And so I get this device, and I download the app on it. And I have no idea what I'm doing with this. I have no idea. And I hand it to Bowen, my son, who's almost now about to be 4. And we got this in that April, kind of when we moved. And he was going to turn 4 in July. So he's not quite 4, and I hand it to him, and I was like, well, here you go. Have fun with it. And of course, he didn't do anything with it. And I was like, I thought you would know what to do because you were using it in your sessions. And so it ended up just collecting dust, honestly. We didn't do anything with it. I didn't know what we were doing with it. He started school again in August at our new school. So he has a new SLP. I talked to her. I told her, I was like, we have a device. I don't know what I'm doing with it. He doesn't know what he's doing with it, just collects dust. And she was like, well, just bring it with him. And so I charged it up, and he took it with him to his sessions, but I think he didn't use it really within those sessions. I don't know if SLP wasn't trained enough in AAC usage, or he also went into a group setting if there was just too many other kids for her to, split that time and everything, but it wasn't really being used, again, still at all. So then I was listening to a podcast from the Apraxia Foundation, and that Apraxia Foundation had an episode on AAC usage. And in that podcast, they were like, you have to model it. And I kind of had this like, duh moment. Of course I have to model it. Like, that makes so much sense. Like, why? Yeah. You model language, I modeled sign language. Like, of course I have to model the AAC. Like, I don't know why it didn't dawn on me ever, but it made so much more sense that I would have to model it for him. Yeah. So I start modeling it a little bit here and there. I still don't think I really understood how to model it. Because if you've ever been on an AAC, and it's so overwhelming. And I think that was another thing. I was just, with sign language, I pick a word. With language, we just talk, like I already have that. And so I still felt so overwhelmed and not knowing what I was doing with this AAC and how to help him. But we would do little things with it. So it was being implemented a little bit more, definitely a lot more than it had been, but it still just was like, I don't know what we're doing. I know that I'm supposed to model it for you, but I don't know really how to model it for you because I don't know anything like how to do that. We ended up getting he wasn't making progress with his apraxia diagnosis at all. So I was like, hey, we need to outsource more. I get a private speech therapist who specializes in apraxia, and I take the AAC with her, and I get to watch her model it to him in their sessions, and it just was like, that's how I do it. The model with no expectation. I feel like would pick out like, hey, she's going to do up and down with it, or she's going to do fast and slow. Yep. She just picked out a couple words like within the frame, and that was what they did. And she did it, and she would do it, and he didn't even do it, but she would just do it while they were doing it. She'd be like, oh, it went up. Oh, now it went down. And she would like click it. And I was like, hey, that's what I got to do. That's what we're going to do. And so I learned a lot from just watching her in the sessions on how I should be using it with him. And that's where we started taking off.
Okay, that is such an awesome story. And I feel like there's a couple of things I wanted to like pull out of there as you were talking. One, I think it's really cool that your preschool that you were in did get started with AAC relatively soon. I know it wasn't like super soon. It was still a couple months. But I've been in a lot of settings and seen a lot of places where it takes a lot longer to even get something. The other thing, though, that downfall to it is like they got it, but then it never came to you. Like you guys never got to see it. It was always just in the like silo of speech therapy, which you so beautifully painted the picture of why that's not okay. Because as soon as it comes home, it's like, okay, well, now what do I do with it? And it really wasn't until you saw somebody actually say, like, this is how I'm going to use it, and I am going to do that modeling without expectation, that like it got rolling. So I love that story. Really powerful story. And you guys did have the device. Did your school district also offer to get a device, or was it kind of like we have it, we'll bring it in, we're good with that?
It was we have it, so we're going to bring it in. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. I know every place is a little bit different when it comes to things like that, but I think it's always good to share that with everybody. So you guys are amazing multimodal communicators. You're doing the verbal speech, you're doing the AAC, you do the sign language, which is awesome. When it came to the AAC piece, like I know in a sense you kind of thought it out yourself, but did you feel like there was any like mindset blocks to starting it, or things you had to kind of work through to even get started and really, really approach it and dive into it?
Yes, absolutely. So I think part of after I got it and it kind of sat on the desk, collected dust, or even when we just started barely using it, I was like, I think in my mind, I had this, like, he's not going to need this very long. We don't have to spend too much time. He's going to take off talking one day. We're going to leave the AAC behind. We're going to leave the sign language behind. We know sign language very well. Like, by the time he's really, needs to talk to other people, he's just going to take off with his language. So I think I had to make this mind shift of, this is serious. Like, he's making slow progress. He's starting to now make more progress with our private speech therapist finally. But I had to shift my mind and being like, this isn't temporary. This is long term, which was hard as a parent. But I had to do that. I had to be like, hey, this isn't a short-term fix. This is a long-term commitment, and we really need to commit to doing this. So I had to make that shift for sure, and then of course just understanding modeling more. I had a weird little piece of me, not really very big, but a tiny piece of me, and maybe somebody else will relate with this, where I was like, it felt weird to carry that iPad everywhere. Because I feel like people are looking at me being like, look at her, she lets her kid just fly on her iPad, have the iPad everywhere. And with that iPad, it's actually locked down where he doesn't do anything else except for communicate on the iPad. He doesn't play games, he doesn't take pictures, it's locked down on the app. So he doesn't even know it does anything else. Like, he only knows that it communicates. But it was just weird. I felt like people were looking at me, and probably not. Nobody probably really cares. It was just like a weird little parenting thing. So I had to get over that really quick, and I did. It wasn't a very long thing. I did have an experience where somebody said to me, they said, oh, he has to take his iPad everywhere, doesn't he? And kind of like laughed about it. But it actually turned out to be a really good, like, advocating moment, because I said, it's actually his communication device. He has apraxia and he's not able to yet speak. So he uses this to be able to communicate with other people. And they were like, oh, well, that's kind of cool. So it actually turned out to be like a good moment for like everybody to like be able to like expose more about what it is to everybody.
Yeah, I think those are so powerful from a parent perspective, because there's so many components to it, and even like society doesn't know what AAC is. Like, so that to me, like, the idea of like having that device and thinking that people like may look at you a little bit differently doesn't surprise me, because I'm like, even when we take it out at dinner, sometimes I'm like, what is everybody thinking about the fact that we took it out? Like, and that's like, but no one knows what's even on it. No one's watching that piece. They're just like, oh, he has his iPad. But I love that you were really able to turn that into an advocating moment, and that person learned something that day and learn to be maybe a little less judgmental about what they see and dig a little deeper to find out more. So I really, really love that. And I think the point about kind of understanding that it might be more long-term is really impactful, and any parents listening are going to really appreciate you saying that. And I think parents, or even SLPs listening, need to be able to see that piece. That's a hard piece to accept. And was there anything that like gave you peace in that acceptance? I know that's like an odd question, but that kind of helped you get there?
It's a good question. I think it just took the time of just being like, this is gonna be a long road, and I think I just had to work through that kind of like denial a little bit of, this is short term. I have an older daughter who was a little bit of a late talker as well, and I think that's why I thought he was gonna follow in her footsteps, and she's now 6 and talks perfectly fine and has no problem. She was a little late to the game as well. And so when he was kind of being late to the game, I was like, we just have some late to the game gene. I don't know. Like, I also had speech therapy. And so it was like, this is just, and my husband had speech therapy. So I was like, we just need a little speech therapy. He ended up needing a lot more, speech therapy than the rest of us are going to need. So I think I just expected him to follow in her footsteps. And then when I realized that he's on a totally different path, he's walking his own footsteps, this is more long-term, and I've got to have to accept that and make this AAC more integrated into our lives.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful for anybody listening and really powerful. And I think a common thing families go through are like, we're gonna get there, we're gonna get there, we're gonna get there, and then when you kind of take that step back, at some point, some kids just take longer, and why not have the support there to help them with everything they have to share? Um, so that's all really really fantastic. So when it comes to the AAC piece, um, it's definitely not been without its challenges. So, what have been some of the most challenging pieces? I know you've talked a little bit about the modeling in and of itself, just even learning how to model,
Mm-hmm.
but what else kind of falls in? Because you guys are truly doing both. I mean, like you're working on verbal speech and AAC, and you're really doing a lot. So, where do those challenging pieces come up?
I think the most challenging for me was just it's a whole nother language, and it's like being handed a language with nobody else showing you that language, and you have to learn this language. And so that was what was just the most challenging for me, was being like not knowing, not understanding. It didn't come with like a book to be like, hey, do this, do that, And I think so that was just hard, just figuring out. And I'm still figuring it out. We have not got it all figured out over here. We're still, going through the journey and still learning a lot about it and how he does things on it sometimes. I'm like, I didn't even. He like read a book on it the other day, and I was like, I didn't even know it had books on it. So, I was learning so much more about it all still. So that was hard. Just it's slow. It's a slow process, and I think that gets challenging just because it gets kind of frustrating for me, where I'm just like, I just want to get it. I just want full sentences on it, but it's such a slow process. So that's kind of hard. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and I think that those are two really important pieces. It doesn't come with an instruction manual. And that's where the support piece, like your current SLP seems to be helping a lot with navigating some of those questions for you guys. And there's always the thing about AAC is I feel like there's tons of places to turn, but never like a full book of start here and end
Mm-hmm.
here.
Mm-hmm.
It's like take this piece and this piece and this piece and then put them all together, and then you got your plan. So as a parent, I can see how that would be incredibly kind of challenging to navigate. And like you said, processing or the time can be really challenging, the progress time, because some kids pick things up really quickly, some kids pick things up slower. And it's so dependent on the kid and the situation and the environment at home. So you got a lot of factors at play for sure. So switching gears to the positive, what has been the most rewarding part of having your AAC device?
We went trick-or-treating this last October, and he was able to participate. And so it was just, we set it up so he could say trick or treat, and he would take it up, and he went trick or treat, and we had thank you right next to it to make it easy for him when we were trick or treating. He went trick or treat, he'd say thank you, and he did it like a pro, and he wore it, and he took it everywhere. And I think he really was like, I'm participating, like I'm trick or treating, like I am getting to do this just like everybody else. And so that was like a really great moment. Fighting with his sister, which sounds so crazy, but he gets to voice his opinion. We went hiking, and she had gotten a little overheated just from walking around, and it was a little bit chillier outside. And she goes, oh, it's so hot. And he, on his device, he goes, the weather is cold. And she was like, when do you get an opinion? No, it's hot outside. And he was just like, the weather is cold. And he just kept saying that to her. And they had this little moment, and I just let him have it because he hasn't really got to like voice his thoughts, his feelings, like, his disagreement with stuff. And so that was like a really great moment where he got to do that. Another one that I had is, even though I feel like I understand him pretty well through gestures and grunts still, even just as his mom and spending all my time with him. And with the ASL, we know a lot of ASL. But we had a moment where he was playing and he was trying to tell me something. And I was not getting it. I was not understanding what he was trying to tell me. And he goes and he gets his device and he pushes waterfall, which we don't have a sign for waterfall. He doesn't have a word for waterfall, and he pushed on it. He's like, waterfall. And I was like, oh, you're making a waterfall. And he had a tape measure that he was putting over the edge of the table. He was like, it's a waterfall. And so that was like a great moment where it was like, it filled in that communication gap that we didn't have with words and that we didn't have with sign language, that he was able to use that AAC to tell me that he was building a waterfall. And so that was rewarding. Like those are, and they happen just sporadically, just like randomly. You're like, oh, that was great. Oh, this is great. And this is great. And it's just been really great. So.
That's awesome. I love all of those stories. Something so powerful about just being able to complete like an everyday routine. I mean, not every day, I guess you don't do a trick-or-treating every day, but an every year routine, like all the kids are getting to do it, and now he got to like truly fully participate in it. And I love the argument, because that is like so kids. Like that's what siblings do. They argue about everything. I have two of my own, and one is like 2, so she's like emerging in her language, but like arguing is one of their preferred love languages. And then the last example about the waterfall is like this perfect encompassing component of, I'm using my words. I also have all these signs that mom understands, but like I don't have anything right now. And my guess would be waterfall wasn't something you guys were like frequently modeling on a regular basis. So for him to go to it and find it and really use it is amazing.
Yeah.
It really fills in that communication piece. Like to me, that is like encompasses what AAC is there for. It's there to fill those gaps when other communication methods aren't there to support it.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. So I love all these stories. I also really appreciate that this is a perfect example of kind of somebody who uses AAC as a support, not necessarily a primary mode of communication. Like he truly is that multimodal communicator using a bunch of different things, but you have that AAC there to genuinely support it. Do you feel like, I mean, you do signs, you do verbal, you do AAC. Is there one that kind of tends to win out over the other the majority of the time?
The majority of the time he prefers ASL. That is, he's going to grab he's going to use his hands before he uses anything else. I think it's, well, you know, it's more for him, it's faster than like trying to find the button in AAC.
Yeah.
It's probably easier than trying to motor plan that word, just using that sign. He starts kindergarten this fall, and I think that is where maybe the AAC may start taking over versus the ASL, because not everybody's going to know ASL, and he'll probably figure that out pretty quick. You know, you don't know what I'm saying. Everybody around him, you know, sister, me, dad, we all know the ASL. We all use it with him. It's quicker. It's easier for him to do. But I think once he starts at kindergarten, which I'm really glad now that we're getting that AAC more implemented, because once he starts at kindergarten, I think he's going to be comfortable, hopefully enough with it to be able to start using it, you know, in that setting and stuff. So I feel like it might take over then. Maybe outside of the home, he may still be more comfortable with ASL in the home because it's quicker. But yeah.
And I think that's a perfect segue into the fact that we all use different communication modes in different settings. So it makes sense to me that the school setting might look different than the home setting, and that if everyone at home knows ASL, of course, that's where he's going to start to get that communication. But then he has that tool in his toolbox to go find something else when everybody doesn't understand. So fantastic. Let's move on to kind of like our ending piece. I'd love to give some tips for parents and SLPs, because you obviously are a parent, but you've also worked with a few SLPs in this process to kind of go that direction. So let's start with parents. If you had to give like a couple tips or one tip for parents that are just starting out with AAC, like where would you go?
So find support, you know, join those Facebook groups, ask the questions on there. If you know you don't have an SLP you feel like you can ask the questions on there. Follow accounts. I didn't know accounts out there existed for AACs. Follow those accounts, find the support group, be patient with yourself for sure. And then I would just say don't give up. I feel like parents sometimes I just gave up for a little bit. We just drop it because it's hard, or we don't understand, or we feel like the kid doesn't get it. I'd say don't stop. It's a voice for your kid. You got to fight for that voice for them. So I would just say, find support, be patient, and just don't give up. Let it take as much time as it needs. Just don't give up.
Beautifully said. I love every single piece of that. For the speech therapists out there, I know there's some other professionals listening too, so this could apply to them. But from that parent perspective, I guess tips for them to really support the parents that are on their AAC journey, because I think that's something that most of us are all trying to do better at, is giving you guys the support you guys need to get the ball rolling with AAC. So what would you say for them?
I would say be patient with the parent, as that parent is overwhelmed. We go through grief, which I don't know if that sounds crazy, but we go through grief with the diagnosis, and so sometimes they might not be quite in a spot to be ready to hear about using an AAC. And I would say let them go through that grief, let them get to a point where you maybe bring it back up, or model it within just your speech session. That's where I learned so much, was just from my SLP modeling it in her speech session. Let parents sit in, model it in there, talk to about it. I would say if you can, if you know, like, give them resources of where to learn more about the AAC, where they can maybe then, when they're ready, they can read it on their own time, they can look it up on their own time, and that way when it's time, they are able to do that, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think those are really important components, especially the grief piece, because as a professional, especially one personally who's like super enthusiastic about AAC constantly and feels that like the whole world would benefit from it if we just gave it to the whole world. Sometimes it is hard to take that step back and be like, this family isn't ready to hear this right now. They will be willing to hear it at one point because they'll be ready to truly support, but there is some type of grief component. And not that they're not supporting during the grief, it's just there's a lot more to that mindset piece than we ever really talk about.
Yeah, I don't think that I super accepted that my son had apraxia until we met our third SLP, who was like, he has apraxia. And it's like, okay, he has apraxia. Like, everybody's telling me this. And so I don't know if it was just part of that grief of like not wanting to accept it, being like, no, this isn't right. Like, they got it wrong. Just people get misdiagnosed all the time. It's misdiagnosis. And so when I met that third SLP, nobody else to this point had been trained in apraxia. And so when I had someone trained in apraxia be like, he has apraxia, I was like, hey, we've got to buckle down a little bit more. This is the road we're on. And I think it was just part of that denial, that grief, that trying to be like this. And I think it was grief. I have a lot of grief for him, I think, because I was like, it's going to be so hard on him. I didn't want this to be his reality. And so just having to accept that, and then accepting, I just all of it. Yeah. So.
Yeah, no, and that it all makes so much sense. And I feel so strongly too, just from like a societal perspective, we have so much to do and learn and grow, so that when families, like, you do get that diagnosis, it's not as overwhelming because it's not stigmatized in any way, shape, or form. Because I feel like almost every kid that comes through my door has some type of diagnosis, and there is some grief that comes with that because it's this really stigmatized thing that, like, my child has a disability, life is going to be really hard, it's going to be XYZ. And from the neurodiversity affirming therapist sitting over here, I'm like, It's going to be great. They're awesome. Let them be them. Like, the world can adjust to it. But that's not the way the rest of the world always sees
I agree.
it.
I think that's part of where that grief comes too, is just like not understanding like what life still can look like and what it still can mean. And you just, it has that stigma of bad, when really it's not bad, it's different. And we just have to work through that different. So So I definitely think that's part of where it comes from, is just that not understanding. And as we learn more about it, I think that grief is definitely smaller now for me than it used to be, because as more I learn about him, and the more I learn about the diagnosis, and the more I see like therapies working and him, thriving, it becomes like less scary, and it becomes more accepting for the parent.
Yeah, I love it. I think this has been an amazing interview with so many great takeaways for speech therapists and parents and professionals alike. Just really looking at what it could look like. And I'm going to come back to something you highlighted a little bit ago, but you said, I don't know everything. Like, we're still figuring this all out. And I think that is so key for people to hear. That's why I'm repeating it. I still learn something new every day. Like, this is just a huge topic, and each kid is going to be so unique and so different that we don't all know what we're doing. Sometimes days happen and we're just like, let's hope that today goes well. Yeah, and we're hoping for the best, and we keep learning and keep growing and keep expanding. And I think that's the best that anybody can do, is truly accepting it and continuing to learn more. Yeah. So Abbye, anything else you want to share with everybody? I think that covers most of our questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think I said everything that I had to say right now.
Awesome. So I know that you do have an Instagram account. So if people want to follow along with your journey, where can they find you?
So on Instagram, I have the Apraxia Warrior, where I made it mostly just for people to follow along on his journey and see how much he grows and thrives in this world. So we can follow along there.
Wonderful. Well, we will also link that in the show notes so everybody can find it. And Abbye, thank you so much for taking some time today. I absolutely loved chatting with you.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me on. It was good.
Okay, everybody. I hope you really enjoyed that interview with Abbye. I thought it was so insightful to really see firsthand what implementing AAC can look like, and also how we can incorporate this multimodal communication idea in our life every day. And she brought up some really fantastic wins that they've had, and then she brought up some really realistic challenges, and I think that viewpoint is so important. So I hope you enjoyed, and for our take action step this week, I really want you to take a minute to reflect how you are modeling your support. So if you are an SLP who is listening, or even an educator that is listening, how are you supporting that family and those other communication partners as they learn and navigate that device? If you are a parent, how do you want to navigate that support? What type of support would be really beneficial and helpful for you? And when we look at those things, just to give you guys a little bit more, you could be looking at doing videos. You could be looking at sending notes home. You could be looking at handouts. Maybe you're talking about an in-person training, or incorporating that parent or communication partner into the session. And there are going to be pros and cons to each one, and each setting really dictates a lot of how you can navigate through those situations. But I do want you to take just a few minutes as you end this podcast to kind of reflect on how you are supporting the other communication partners, or if you are a communication partner, how you would prefer to be supported, and get that ball rolling. Start to have those conversations, start to implement that support, and see what a big difference it can make. So that is all for this week. I will see you guys next week on the Take Action podcast.